Berlin, 1945. A young woman kneels in the rubble of what was once her family's church, the same sanctuary where she'd married her husband 7 years earlier. The crucifix that had blessed their union lies shattered at her feet. The priests who promised eternal love in God's name are dead or fled. The faith that sustained her through childhood has crumbled like the walls around her. Yet in her pocket she clutches a letter from her husband, a prisoner somewhere in Soviet Russia, words of devotion that make her heart race despite everything she's lost. She has stopped believing in God, but she has not stopped believing in Him. This moment, repeated in countless variations across human history, poses one of the most profound paradoxes of human existence. Why does romantic love persist when the very metaphysical frameworks that supposedly sustain it collapse entirely? Why do atheists fall just as desperately in love as believers? Why did the most devastating century for organized religion, the 20th century, produce the most enduring love stories in human culture? Why does love survive when faith dies? The answer lies not in philosophy or theology, but in something far more primal, far more ancient, and far more powerful than any institution ever created. In 1989, anthropologist Helen Fisher began what would become a revolutionary study of romantic love. Using early fMRI technology, she scanned the brains of people who described themselves as madly in love. What she discovered changed our understanding of human attachment forever. When shown photographs of their beloved specific regions of subjects' brains lit up like fireworks, the same areas associated with cocaine addiction, specifically the ventral tegmental area and the caudate nucleus. These regions are part of the brain's most primitive reward system, structures that existed in our ancestors millions of years before the first humans walked upright, let alone conceived of gods. Love, it turns out, is not a human invention. It's not even a primate invention. Prairie voles, tiny rodents native to North America, form monogamous pair bonds that last their entire lives. When researchers blocked the receptors for oxytocin and vasopressin in these animals' brains, the bonds failed to form. The biology of attachment is written into our neural architecture at such a fundamental level that it operates entirely independent of conscious belief systems. But here's what makes the human story so much more complicated, so much more fascinating. In medieval Europe, the concept of romantic love as we understand it barely existed. Marriages were economic arrangements, political alliances, strategies for survival. The Catholic Church held absolute dominion over human relationships, declaring marriage a sacrament, love a duty to God. Yet even in this era of total faith, something unexpected began to happen. 12th century France gave birth to the tradition of courtly love, a radical philosophy that elevated romantic passion to the highest form of human experience. Troubadours composed poetry not about divine love, but about the agonizing beauty of desiring another person. These weren't hymns to God, they were hymns to human connection. Eleanor of Aquitaine patronized these poets, creating courts of love where the rules of romantic devotion were debated with the same fervor that theologians debated Scripture. The Church condemned this movement as heresy, yet it spread across Europe like wildfire. The paradox deepens. Romantic love as a cultural force emerged not from religious doctrine, but often in direct opposition to it. The most famous love stories of history, Romeo and Juliet, Abelard and Eloise, Tristan and Isolde, are tales of passion that defies religious and social order. Love was the rebel, not the faithful servant. Fast forward to August 6, 1945. Hiroshima. Dr. Terufumi Sasaki, a young surgeon at Red Cross Hospital, worked for days without sleep treating the wounded after the atomic blast. In the chaos, he encountered a woman named Sadako, a nurse who'd survived by sheer chance. They had both lost everything: family, faith in humanity, any sense that the universe had meaning or order. Traditional Japanese religious structures had utterly failed to prevent or explain the horror they'd witnessed. Yet within months, Dr. Sasaki and Sadako were married. They remained devoted to each other for 53 years until his death in 1998. When asked late in life about what sustained him through the trauma, Dr. Sasaki didn't mention Buddha or any divine power. He spoke of Sadako's hands, the way she moved through the hospital, the sound of her voice. Love hadn't saved him from horror. Love had given him a reason to continue despite horror. This pattern repeats throughout the 20th century, the bloodiest and most faith-shattering period in human history. The World Wars, the Holocaust, Stalin's purges, Mao's Cultural Revolution, events that destroyed religious faith for millions. Yet study after study shows that survivors of these catastrophes who maintained romantic partnerships had significantly better psychological outcomes than those who didn't. Viktor Frankl wrote extensively about this in Man's Search for Meaning, describing how thoughts of his wife sustained him in Auschwitz, even after learning she had died. The love remained real, remained powerful, remained capable of providing meaning, even when its object no longer existed. The neuroscience explains why. When Fisher and her colleagues expanded their research, they discovered that long-term attachment activates different brain regions than early-stage romantic love. Couples married for decades showed activity in areas associated with maternal attachment, the bond between mother and child, arguably the most powerful biological imperative in mammalian existence. This system evolved over hundreds of millions of years long before humans, before consciousness itself as we understand it. But we're not just our biology. The story gets stranger. In 1970s Romania, under the brutal atheist dictatorship of Nicolae Ceausescu, religion was systematically suppressed. Churches were demolished, priests imprisoned, religious education banned. The regime promoted scientific materialism as the only acceptable worldview. Yet during this period, Romania saw no decrease in marriage rates, no decline in expressions of romantic love. In fact, love letters from this era, now preserved in the National Archives in Bucharest, are among the most passionate and eloquent in Romanian literary history. People who had been taught that the universe was meaningless matter in motion still wrote to each other as though their love was the most meaningful thing in existence. Why? Because love operates on a level that bypasses theological frameworks entirely. Hey, quick question for you. Where in the world are you watching this from? And what time is it there? Drop a comment. I'm genuinely curious how far these stories travel. Consider the case of China's Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976. Religion was declared feudal superstition, temples were destroyed, and millions were persecuted for any spiritual beliefs. Yet researcher Yunxiang Yan, studying villages in northeastern China, documented that this period saw the emergence of what he called the individualization of intimacy. For the first time in Chinese history, young people began choosing marriage partners based purely on romantic attraction rather than family arrangement. Love became more central to human life precisely when faith was being systematically eliminated. The pattern holds even in the opposite direction. In contemporary Saudi Arabia, where religious law governs every aspect of life, romantic love persists as a powerful, often subversive force. Young Saudis use encrypted apps to communicate with romantic interests, write poetry that echoes the courtly love tradition of medieval France, risk severe punishment for relationships outside approved channels. The faith that structures their society hasn't eliminated the drive toward romantic connection. It's merely redirected it, complicated it, made it more dangerous, and therefore, paradoxically, often more intense. This is because love and faith, despite their apparent connection in human culture, emerge from fundamentally different sources. Faith requires belief in something beyond the material world. It demands acceptance of unprovable propositions, trust in invisible forces, hope for rewards that may only come after death. Faith is, by definition, a cognitive process, a choice to believe. Love, on the other hand, is not a choice. Ask anyone who's fallen for the wrong person, anyone who's tried to stop loving someone who's hurt them, anyone who's felt attraction to someone their conscious mind knows is unsuitable. The early Christian theologians understood this, which is why they were so suspicious of romantic love. Augustine called it a form of madness that distracts from God. Thomas Aquinas argued it was inferior to divine love precisely because it was involuntary, passionate, uncontrolled. They were right to be concerned. Love is uncontrolled. It emerges from brain systems that evolved to ensure reproduction and child rearing, systems that don't consult our beliefs before activating. These systems can be triggered by everything from facial symmetry to pheromones to the mere repeated exposure to another person. The brain literally becomes addicted to the beloved, creating a dependency that has nothing to do with religious faith and everything to do with neurochemistry. But here's the truly fascinating part, the element that elevates human love beyond mere biology: narrative. Humans are story-making creatures. We don't just experience love, we tell ourselves stories about it. And when faith collapses, love stories become even more important. In the Soviet Union, after the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks attempted to destroy not just religion, but the traditional family structure. Alexandra Kollontai, a prominent revolutionary, advocated for the withering away of the family, arguing that in a communist society, romantic love was a bourgeois distraction. The state would raise children collectively. Relationships would be casual, free from the chains of marriage and monogamy. It failed spectacularly. By the 1930s, Stalin reversed course entirely, promoting traditional family values despite the official atheism. Why? Because people continued falling in love, forming deep attachments, creating their own narratives of meaning through romantic partnership. The state could control ideology, but it couldn't control neurochemistry. And those narratives matter. When researchers study what makes love endure across decades, they consistently find that couples who maintain strong relationships tell themselves coherent stories about their love. They create shared narratives, private mythologies, personal religions of two. These stories don't require gods or afterlives. They require only the mutual construction of meaning. Take the example of Christopher Hitchens and Carol Blue. Hitchens was perhaps the most famous atheist of the 21st century, a man who wrote that religion was the main source of hatred in the world. Yet his writings about his wife are transcendent, almost mystical. He described their love as the central fact of his existence, the thing that gave his life shape and purpose. When he was dying of cancer, he wrote that his only regret was leaving her behind. Here was a man who denied all supernatural meaning, yet found in romantic love something that functioned exactly as religious faith functions for believers: a source of ultimate meaning, a reason to endure suffering, a connection to something that felt larger than his individual existence. The philosopher Alain de Botton points out that romantic love in the modern secular age has taken on many functions previously fulfilled by religion. We expect our partners to be confessor, savior, source of transcendence, guide to meaning. We speak of soulmates, a term that presupposes souls, but persists even among atheists. We create rituals, anniversaries, private jokes, shared routines that mirror religious observance. We seek in another person what previous generations sought in God: unconditional acceptance, ultimate purpose, relief from existential loneliness. This isn't a failure of secular thinking. It's a revelation of what love actually is, a fundamental human need that operates independently of our metaphysical frameworks. Consider the biological evidence. Anthropologists studying 166 different cultures found evidence of romantic love in every single one, regardless of religious tradition or lack thereof. The symptoms were identical: intrusive thinking about the beloved, emotional dependency, fear of rejection, preference for the beloved over all others. From the atheist Piraha tribe of the Amazon to the devoutly Muslim cultures of Southeast Asia, from the Catholic societies of Latin America to the officially atheist state of North Korea, humans fall in love in exactly the same way. Even more striking, other species experience it too. Albatrosses mate for life and have been observed mourning the loss of partners. Wolves form preferential pair bonds that last decades. Gibbons sing duets with their mates, personalized songs that no other pair shares. Love predates not just faith, but humanity itself. So why does love survive when faith collapses? because love doesn't depend on faith. It never did. What's been happening over the past few centuries isn't the survival of love, despite the decline of faith. It's the revealing of what love always was, a biological imperative wrapped in cultural narrative, a neurochemical process that we elevate through storymaking, an evolutionary adaptation that we experience as transcendence. The real question isn't why love survives, but why we ever thought it needed faith to sustain it. This is Professor Archive. If these stories are doing something for you, if this kind of exploration matters, there's a super thanks option right below this video. It helps us keep digging into these kinds of questions. Totally optional, but genuinely appreciated if you can. In 1953, DNA was discovered, revealing the molecular basis of life itself. For many, this was another blow to faith, reducing existence to chemistry and chance. Yet that same year, Dr. James Watson, one of the discoverers, fell deeply in love with his future wife, Elizabeth. He later wrote that no amount of understanding about neurotransmitters and evolution diminished the power of what he felt. If anything, understanding the mechanism made the experience more remarkable, not less. That such profound meaning could emerge from molecular interactions seemed to him more miraculous than any religious explanation. This gets at something crucial. Love's independence from faith doesn't make it less meaningful. It makes it more reliable. Faith can be destroyed by evidence, by trauma, by philosophical argument. Millions have lost their religious beliefs through no fault of their own, through experiences that shattered their ability to believe in divine goodness. But love operates at a level that trauma can't entirely destroy. Even people with severe PTSD, people who've lost the ability to trust, people who've seen the absolute worst of humanity can still form attachments. The brain's love systems can be damaged, but they're remarkably resilient. There's data on this. Studies of refugees from war zones show that while religious faith often diminishes or transforms after extreme trauma, the capacity for romantic attachment, while strained, generally persists. People who've lost everything, including their faith, still fall in love. They still form partnerships. They still create new families, new sources of meaning. This is why love stories from concentration camps are so devastating and so uplifting simultaneously. In Theresienstadt, Nazi prisoners created secret marriages, held clandestine ceremonies, wrote love letters on scraps of paper. Their faith in God's justice was shattered by their circumstances. How could it not be? But their capacity to love another person survived. Survivors reported that these relationships, even when brief, even when doomed, provided the only moments of authentic human meaning in an inhuman situation. The philosopher Martha Nussbaum argues that this reveals something fundamental about the nature of meaning itself. Meaning doesn't come from eternal truths or divine command. It comes from vulnerability, from the risky business of attaching ourselves to finite, mortal beings. Love is meaningful precisely because it's fragile, because it exists without guarantees, because it persists even when we know it will end. This is perhaps why love has become even more central to human life, as faith has declined in many societies. In Scandinavia, where religious belief and practice have dropped to historic lows, surveys show that people rate romantic relationships as the single most important source of life meaning, far above career, community, or personal achievement. In Japan, where organized religion plays a minimal role for most people, the concept of kizuna, deep interpersonal bonds, especially romantic ones, has become the primary framework for discussing what makes life worthwhile. We haven't replaced God with love. We've discovered that love was always there, waiting underneath our theological explanations. But what about the counterargument? Don't religious societies have stronger families, longer marriages, more stable relationships? The data is complex and fascinating. Yes, in highly religious communities, divorce rates are often lower and marriage rates higher. But here's the twist. When researchers control for social pressure, economic factors, and cultural expectations, the correlation between religious faith and relationship satisfaction largely disappears. What matters isn't belief in God. It's belief in the relationship itself, commitment to the partner, willingness to work through difficulties. Secular couples who view their relationship as sacred, who create rituals around it, who treat it as their highest priority, show the same longevity and satisfaction as religious couples. The mechanism isn't divine blessing, it's human commitment, amplified by narrative and ritual. In fact, some research suggests that excessively rigid religious frameworks can damage relationships by creating unrealistic expectations or preventing honest communication. Dr. Kristen Lauren at Stanford found that people in religions with strict rules about relationships often reported lower satisfaction but felt more trapped, unable to leave even dysfunctional partnerships. Love was surviving but not thriving. The healthiest relationships, according to decades of research by John Gottman and others, share common features that have nothing to do with shared faith. Mutual respect, effective communication, willingness to repair after conflict, maintaining friendship alongside passion. These elements appear in successful relationships across all cultures, all religions, and all levels of belief or non-belief. Love has its own logic, its own requirements, its own path to flourishing. Faith can support that or hinder it, but it's not the foundation. What about the philosophical dimension? Don't we need God to explain why love feels so meaningful, so transcendent? This is where things get really interesting. Evolutionary psychologists have discovered that the feeling of transcendence in love, that sense of touching something eternal, something beyond ourselves, is itself a biological function. When we fall deeply in love, the boundaries of self actually blur in our neural processing. Brain regions that normally maintain clear distinction between self and other show overlapping activity when we think about our beloved. We literally begin to process our partner as part of ourselves. This creates a genuine expansion of consciousness, a real experience of transcendence that doesn't require supernatural explanation. We're not imagining the profundity of love, we're experiencing a neurologically real dissolution of the self-other boundary. The mistake is thinking this makes it less real or less meaningful. A sunset doesn't become less beautiful because we understand the physics of light scattering. An orgasm doesn't become less pleasurable because we understand the role of dopamine and oxytocin. And love doesn't become less transcendent because we understand the neuroscience. If anything, the naturalistic explanation makes love more remarkable. We are matter that has become conscious, brains that have evolved the capacity to find ultimate meaning and connection with other brains. We're the universe becoming aware of itself, finding purpose in itself, loving itself through the connection between conscious beings. That's genuinely miraculous without requiring actual miracles. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who struggled with faith throughout his life, wrote that love is two solitudes that protect and border and greet each other. He understood that love doesn't erase our fundamental aloneness. Nothing can do that, not even God, but it makes that aloneness bearable, even beautiful. It creates meaning not by denying our finite material nature, but by embracing it, by saying yes to existence despite its limitations. This might be why love stories have replaced religious parables as our primary source of moral and existential guidance. Think about it. What narratives do we return to again and again in our secular age? Love stories. The films that move us most deeply, the books that sell millions of copies, the songs that define generations, they're overwhelmingly about romantic love. We've created a new mythology, one that doesn't require gods but serves the same function. Explaining who we are, what matters, how to live. And here's the crucial point. These stories work. They actually guide us toward meaningful lives. Research on narrative identity shows that people who tell coherent love stories about their relationships, who can explain how they met, why they chose each other, how they've overcome challenges, have stronger relationships than those who can't. The story isn't decoration, it's structure. It's how we make sense of the biochemistry, how we give shape to the neurological processes, how we transform attachment into meaning. This is what humans do. We're the storytelling species, the meaning-making animal. We don't just experience love. We narrate it, mythologize it, build entire lives around the stories we tell about it. When faith collapses, this capacity remains. In fact, it often intensifies. People who lose religious faith frequently report that their romantic relationships become deeper, more central, more consciously treasured. Without the comfort of eternal life, without the promise of reunion in heaven, the time we have with our beloved becomes infinitely precious. Every moment is unrepeatable, every experience singular. Love becomes more intense precisely because we know it's finite. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who famously declared God dead, wrote extensively about love. He argued that the highest form of love, what he called amor fati, love of fate, was only possible for those who accepted the material, finite nature of existence. Only by loving something we know will end can we truly love it. Religious promises of eternity actually diminish love by making it less urgent, less precious, less real. Whether or not you agree with Nietzsche, there's something to this. The loves that endure in memory, the ones that shape us most profoundly, are often those touched by mortality. We remember the last summer with a dying parent, the final year with a partner before illness took them, the brief romance that ended too soon. These loves are seared into us precisely because they were finite, because we knew even as we lived them that they were temporary. Faith promises to solve this problem, to make love eternal. But in doing so, it might actually miss the point. Love derives its power from vulnerability, from the courage to attach ourselves to something we know we'll lose. That's not a flaw to be fixed. It's the very thing that makes love meaningful. So yes, where are you watching from? What's your profession? What time is it there? I'm asking because I'm curious about the human beings receiving this story, because connection across distance, across difference, is its own kind of love, its own kind of meaning-making. That's what we do. We reach across the void toward each other. As we approach the end here, let's return to Berlin, 1945. That young woman in the ruined church, her faith shattered, her husband imprisoned somewhere in the Soviet system. Her name was Margarete Fischer, and her story has a resolution. Her husband, Karl, survived the gulags and returned to her in 1952, 7 years after the war ended. He was a broken man, his health destroyed, his faith in humanity gone. But he had survived, he later said, because of her letters, because of the idea of her. Not the idea of God, not hope for heaven, the idea of Margarete. They lived together for another 43 years in a rebuilt Germany, in a world that had moved on from the certainties that defined their youth. Neither returned to church, neither reclaimed faith, but they built a life together, raised children, created their own private rituals and meanings. When Karl died in 1995, Margaret told an interviewer that her love for him was the one thing in her life that had never wavered, never required explanation, never needed justification. It simply was. That's the answer to our question. Love survives when faith collapses because love never depended on faith in the first place. Love is older than religion, deeper than theology, more fundamental than any belief system. It's written into our biology, expressed through our narratives, experienced as transcendence, even when we know it's neurons firing and neurotransmitters flowing.